1. I was scheduled to have maintenance work done in my apartment at 9 a.m. and was anxiously waiting with nothing to do until then. I decided to go for a little drive to burn time. I live on a side street to a main 4-lane street in my city. The streetlights on this road have all been replaced with LED-type lights which give off a harsh white light when on, compared to their prior softer light of an older-style light. Since it was 7:30 a.m., all the streetlights were off and daylight was beginning. In my car, I pulled up to the stoplights where my street joined a larger street, and put my blinker on, waiting to turn right. Drivers barrel along that street quite fast, so I typically wait until there's a huge break in traffic, or to the point when all have driven past me before I begin any turn. My car is not the fastest, and takes time to get up to speed. The speed limit is 60 kilometers per hour, but people typically drive 75 kilometers per hour. On that day, all cars passed in front of me, and I proceeded to make my right turn onto the larger street. Rearview mirror check to be sure, no one behind me at all. Great. I have a 5-speed manual and took my time getting up to 4th gear. As I was cruising along, I started humming the tune to a song out loud in the car. Radio was not on. Like an idiot, I start making electronic noises of the tune, breaking it down to basic notes and making sounds to entertain myself as I drive along. I know, stupid things you do when no one else can hear. So I'm making electronic sounds of 8 notes of the song, over and over, my mind elsewhere, when all of a sudden in front of my car I see a circular orange spotlight shine as I'm driving forward. It was half on the sidewalk and half in the curb lane I was in. Maybe it was about 6 to 8 feet in diameter. It flashed twice. Each flash was about 1 second, with about 1 second in between, about 15 feet in front of my car. It took up half the sidewalk and half my curb lane. It reminded me of a strange spotlight shining down to a tight focus. The air was clear, so there was no shaft of light for the beam as you would see in fog. Maybe 5 seconds later, the circle of orange light flashed directly ahead of me on the road, exactly in my lane between the white dotted line and the curb. It flashed 3 times, again about 1 second for each flash, and a second between flashes. A very lazy on and off flash. You could tell it grew in intensity and faded out. All very short to only last a second, but it was not like an LED instant on and off type of light. It was like the quick orange pulse of light. Then the orange light happened again, and it was right on my car. It illuminated the bottom portion of my windshield and wipers, and I'm thinking, what the heck? Only this time the orange light stayed on for maybe 5 seconds or more, and the interior of the car was partially illuminated in a pale orange light. I checked my rearview mirror to see if it was a truck behind me, but there were no other vehicles around. I flicked my turn signals on and off, but they don't make a spotlight effect on the road, and the streetlights are a harsh white LED and don't make tight orange spots on the road. Plus, these streetlights were off anyway. If it was a streetlight, since I was driving 60 kilometers per hour, the orange lighty spot would have remained static while I drove through it. But this kept pace with me, as if it was above me, shining down. I flicked the 2 interior dome lights by my rearview mirror, thinking they might be doing this. Flick on, off. Nope, they are a very weak white light. What is going on? Why is the inside of the car a soft orange color? Then, just as quick as it started, it was over. No more pale orange light flashes. Interior of the car is back to normal. From start to finish, the whole thing lasted at least 20 seconds. I was in high alert mode after that, looking for any sight or sound. Eyes bug-eyed and wide open, hands clenching the steering wheel. A major cross street was coming up. I decided to bail on my drive, turn back and go home. So then I was driving back, recounting the events in my head. But then I started to laugh as the thought of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind came to me. The part where the ship landed, and they're making tone sounds to try and communicate with the ship. As I said out loud, did I accidentally say something to you? Did I open a communication link? Half joking, but really. That's what it seemed like to me. I started making the same electronic-type sounds again in a joking effort to make the lights come back to me. But nothing happened. It was like something above was shining a beam down, trying to pinpoint me. First half the sidewalk, then corrected to the lane, then corrected to focus on me and my car. Fortunately, there was no missing me. I got back home in minutes, none the worse for wear. I went back in subsequent days trying to recreate it. looking at the street lights and for any other light sources on that stretch of road. Nothing that would do that, and traveling for 60 kilometers per hour for about 20 seconds in all, counting flashes, lights, and time in between them, means I had traveled about 300 meters or almost 1,000 feet, and the light stayed with me. 2. To understand this story, you must know something about me. I was raised Catholic by a very strict grandmother. We never missed a sunrise mass, midnight mass, 8 a.m. mass. If there was a service happening at our church, you could be assured Grandma and I were right there in our pew, ready for worship. I took Grandma's teachings to heart and committed them to memory. One thing she told me was God will never give you more than you can handle. You, my love, were built for the hurricanes that will come at you. You are strong, you are brave. You will survive and be stronger because of the battles you will face. I know this sounds rough for a 7-year-old to hear, but those words would replay in my ears for many years to come. Fast forward 10 years, I was in a foster care home. One of 9 girls in the house, I was the oldest. I had lived there the longest, and the girls lovingly called me Mom, because I did most of the cooking. My tuna casserole is delicious. I was the one most of them came to for advice, homework help, boy trouble, big sister stuff. Okay, enough setup. Here's what happened over a 6-week period. July 1988. Summer is in full force. Lazy days of sunbathing, swimming, basketball games on the court, bike riding, you know. Normal teenagers being normal teenagers. Most of the girls had left for home visits, if court approved, and were due back. Because of varied arrival times, the foster parents didn't plan a big dinner, just cold sandwiches, sliced veggies, fruits, potato and macaroni salads, chips. Yummy. I was in the kitchen refilling the ice buckets to keep the drinks cold. When I heard the front door open, I instantly felt a heavy, dark feeling creep up my back. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and a knot developed right between my shoulders. I walked out of the kitchen to see which of my foster sisters had arrived. It was Jennifer. She went straight to her room, dropped off her bags, and then headed to see our foster parent to check in. While she checked in, I walked towards her room. The dark feeling just kept getting stronger. I turned heel, went back to the kitchen, and grabbed a new container of table salt. I went to my room and created salt lines along the doorways and windows. I grabbed my rosary beads, I got on my knees, instantly started praying to St. Michael the Archangel. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and snares of the devil. I prayed. Every Catholic prayer replayed in my mind, my mouth eager to keep up. I grabbed my Bible, opened and began reading. I started studying, reading, reassuring myself that I was strong. I was a survivor. My faith would be my shield, and no evil darkness would harm me. I stayed in my room. I prayed. As night fell, more sisters arrived home. I didn't leave my room to greet them as I would normally have done. Maybe about 2 hours later, Carol knocked on my door. I let her in, and she looked pale. Mom, Jennifer brought home a Ouija board. I think it has something dark attached to it. She paused, looked at my salt lines, rosary beads, Bible, and the peace that could be felt in my room. Can I stay here for a bit? Please know this. I did not and do not press my faith onto anyone. Your relationship with your God is between you and your God. Carol knew of my history, all the physical and mental abuse I survived, the stories behind the visible scars. Is your God protecting you from that darkness? I showed Carol how I was praying, how I was protecting my area. 3 sisters came into my room, armed themselves with knowledge, and retreated to their rooms. 5 sisters played with that board. 5 sisters felt darkness. The darkness followed them in their daily lives, mostly manifesting as physical fights and slamming doors. This went on for 2 weeks. There was just a heaviness, a very palatable tension felt by everyone in the house. Jennifer came to my room the night before she was to leave for a weekend visit with her father. Mom, I know you know about the board. I'm sorry. I should have listened to you about it. She was crying. Jen never cried about anything. She looked older, battered, just road-weary. How do I get rid of that thing? How do I get the piece you have? I told Jen what she should do with that board. Set it on fire while she's at her father's house. And pray to whatever God she believed in. I, too, would pray. I went to our local church. Asked the priest to come pray with us. Blessed the house and once again invoked St. Michael the Archangel. to help us battle this darkness. It took 4 weeks of prayers to rid the house of that darkness. By the time school resumed, all was well in our house, no more fighting. The heaviness was gone. Jen has never touched another board to this day. 3. So for a few months now, something weird has been hanging around and outside my house. The first time it became apparent was when one night I was in the basement. Outside the window is a porch. There is a light switch for the lights by the door. I went upstairs for a bit. When I realized later I left the lights on, I went downstairs to turn them off. When I came down, the porch lights were on. Now, my father has tried endlessly to hook them to a timer with no success to his disappointment. I assumed that he had finally figured out and paid the lights no mind. What I hadn't known was my dad had given up weeks ago and put in an average light switch. Next morning, I go down and see the lights are still on. I assume the timer didn't turn them off, so I go to shut them off. I discover to my shock it's a switch. This causes me to panic a bit because that meant someone had been out there and the rest of my family was asleep last night, and quite likely they could have been watching me. By the way, I have an extreme fear of being watched. A few weeks later, I'm sitting downstairs on the couch. I'm home alone. It's the dead of night and my dog, who is very relaxed with frequent events, but has a habit of being chill sometimes. Suddenly she perks up and looks out the window. Out of habit, I look with her and see something hunched and white dropping down over our fence and run past the windows. Thanks to the dirty windows and the glare of the lights, I couldn't even hope to make out what I saw or how big it was. But I yelped, panicked, and called my buddies. They were skeptical and told me it was probably a raccoon, and I ended up agreeing. I went outside my dogs, my older chocolate lab and my German puggle, German Shepherd Pug Beagle mix, the one who had been with me. I went out trying to see what it was, and right away my dogs had 2 very different reactions. The lab was pacing and sniffing and looking around and being very anxious. The other was wagging her tail and looking at the trees the way she does when I have treats. Suddenly, from said trees I hear a loud groan. These are big, strong, old trees, and they don't groan, not unless something is on them. And the mountain lion who went up them a year ago proved that. Midwest United States, by the way. Now, I tried shining a light up there, but saw nothing. But the trees are thick, and it wasn't until that mountain lion growled last time that I saw him up there in broad daylight. FYI, it is weird seeing mountain lions here. When authorities came, though, they ended up determining it was sick and malnourished, so they weren't shocked it wandered into the area. I ended up going inside because my puggle was moving between the trees with the same look. My lab seemed to be getting increasingly anxious, but now was staying away from the trees and just watching them, my puggle, and me. And I wasn't seeing anything, so... But all night, I heard weird things. The worst was a loud slam like a tree branch had fallen, but there was nothing there. And my puggle kept going to the windows and acting unhappy about being kept in. But the rest was like the sound of something on the roof, pebbles being thrown at the window, and the return of a woodpecker who should have been dead after my cats got the poor thing with a vengeance. I don't know where they were in all this. Now here was the climax that drove me here. It's been a couple of months now, and I have mostly forgotten about it. Occasionally I'll hear something weird on the front porch, or footsteps, and the porch lights will get turned on mysteriously. But they're small things. Tonight I was with my sister and FaceTiming with a friend in the basement again, when we hear a screeching sound. Now my first concern was my 2 of 3 cat siblings, who had taken to taking over the area, which meant they liked to fight the raccoons, dumb cats. Now the sound didn't sound like any raccoon I've ever heard, but they make odd sounds, especially when cats are attacking it. So I run to the window in the next room where I believe I'll be able to see them, then go out to break the fight up from a safe distance. But I instead let out a scream and a flurry of curse words. Outside, standing taller than me for sure, I'm 6 feet, so pretty tall, was a gaunt white humanoid figure with its back turned to the window. When I got back to the window and looked back out, it was nowhere to be seen. I at first thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. There was snow on the ground, and I was dying for a rational explanation. because it scared me bad. I was shaking. I told my sister and she laughed at me. I went upstairs later that night and got everything ready for the night and locked up. When I went back up front, I froze. I could see my cat, who seemed agitated but calm for the most part, on the garage roof, looking at something on my porch. That something was the same white figure, back turned again. Except this time it was squatted down and looking at my cat. It didn't seem confrontational itself. But then, for God's sakes, this sent me into tears. It turned its whole body, twisted, and it seemed to kind of straighten as it did. I can only think of a meerkat as an example, but it was so sudden I was sure I heard bones crack through the window. I never saw the face. As soon as it turned, fight or flight kicked in, and I ran into my room as fast as I could. The last thing I saw of it as I slammed my door was it on the railing as it leapt towards what I assume was the nearby tree. Ever since, I've been in my room shaking, crying, wheezing in a hysterical fit. I like paranormal stuff, but it's a hard no on experiencing it. Now that I calmed down enough to type, I've been thinking about its actions, and back to the previous events, I'm trying to explain this to myself. I at first drew a comparison to the creepypasta creature the Rake. That didn't help my panic, as you can imagine. But the Rake, while highly hostile, this thing seemed calm and relaxed most of the time. I don't know what I saw, and it's freaking me out, and I want this down before I go crying into sleep. Please, when I wake up, give me an explanation. Because I don't want this thing to be real, but this wasn't some homeless guy. I don't know. I need sleep. 4. I've told this story to a few co-workers and they believe me. My boss has seen the way the lights once flickered there, and I've never told him about how I fixed the problem. So here's how it all went. I decided to work overnight at the club where I'm a maintenance man. I was alone in the place, so it was pretty nice at first. I hijacked the sound system and played my own music while I worked. And for a while, everything was normal. I decided to go check on the boiler in the mezzanine, and this is where the night changed. This mezzanine floor has been problematic since I started there about 1.5 years prior. The lights would flicker, the pumps ran roughly, and the power from the breaker box would drop and go back to normal in quick intervals. It happened so quickly that the pumps never shut off. But when I measured the power with my multimeter, I could see it dip and come back up again, causing the display on my meter to fluctuate rapidly. I had called an electrician about the first 6 months in on the job, and he had looked over everything in the mezzanine floor. The answer seemed obvious. The breaker box was from the 1960s, and was so old that it wasn't working properly. He recommended changing it for a new one. The board of directors scoffed at the price, and so we operated with the old box for another year. This night, I was in the same mezzanine, and the lights were flickering as usual. It got chilly, and the lights began to flicker more rapidly. After about 30 seconds, it began flashing like a strobe light. I stood in the doorway, beginning to feel a little afraid of the light bulbs exploding. I looked at the one closest to me, and then noticed him out of the corner of my eye. I was not alone in the room. There was a man standing in the corner looking at me. I was so scared that I turned very slowly to look at him. In the strobing light, my eyes moved closer to his position, and I was too scared to move them any more quickly. I can see very well in my peripheral vision, well enough to read sometimes. I saw a man in a navy blue shirt and pants staring at me with his teeth bared. He looked as if he had been horribly burned, and his eyelids and lips were gone. He was about 5 feet and 7 inches tall. Slowly, still, my eyes moved toward him until they rested on the spot he had been standing. But he was gone. I called out into the room, scared and trying to remain brave. "Dude, you're dead," I said. "You're not supposed to be here." The strobe light effect of the lights became more intense. "Whatever place has been calling to you, that pull you feel? You have to go there. There's nothing left for you here. You're dead," I told him. I tried to feel love for the unfortunate soul, and suddenly the flashing stopped. The mezzanine went back to normal, better than I had ever seen it. The lights stopped flickering altogether, the pumps were purring like they'd never done before. The power from the breaker box has been consistent ever since. I haven't had the problem after that. Do I deserve a raise? 5. This happened to me when I was about 11 years old. It was the 90s. I have lived my whole life in El Paso, Texas. The culture is rich in folklore and religious beliefs. Many Hispanic families have stories of the paranormal. One legend popular is the legend of the Weeping Woman, aka La Llorona. The legend of La Llorona has been part of Hispanic culture in the Southwest since the days of the conquistadors. The tall, thin spirit is said to be blessed with natural beauty and long, flowing black hair. Wearing a white gown, she roams the rivers and creeks, wailing into the night and searching for children to drag screaming to a watery grave. No one really knows when the legend of La Llorona began or from where it originated. Though the tales vary from source to source, the one common thread is that she is the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children, and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. One night, just like any other night, I lived in a trailer with my mom and dad. My youngest brother was staying with my aunt this night. I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and when I woke up, I was on the sofa in my living room. The time was 4 a.m., which illuminated the stove in the kitchen. The television was off, and I normally had a light on, but this time it was pitch black. I woke up, and I heard a horrible screaming that was coming from far in the distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch that was a few feet away from my home. I heard it and thought I was hearing things. I asked myself, am I dreaming? Then I started to hear the animals outside howling and whimpering. These animals that I speak of are cats and dogs. As the screaming got closer, the animals continued to cry. The screaming was something I have never experienced ever before. It sounded like I was in a big hallway and a woman was screaming her guts out down that hallway. Then, in all this screaming, I started to make out words being said by whoever this was at 4 a.m. screaming their guts out. The woman said, "Ay, mis hijos!" "Oh, my children." In a huge panic, I quickly got up from the sofa and ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I was asleep. I turned the closest light on and looked around. The screaming didn't stop. In fact, the screaming only got louder and closer. I questioned my sanity at that moment. Was I going crazy or hearing things? Then I thought to myself, this is real, and the animals are responding to it in a negative way. So I did what any other 11-year-old boy would do in a moment like this. I ran to my mom and dad's room. I reached for my mom and shook her awake wildly. She woke up slowly, and to my amazement, the screaming faded away as she woke. I thought to myself, what the heck is going on? I told my mother, "Mom, do you hear that screaming and crying lady?" My mom was half asleep as she said, "Go back to sleep, it is most likely just your imagination." I told her, "No, this is real, please listen, don't you hear her?" My mom quickly just said, "You are dreaming, go back to sleep, it's going to be okay." By then the screaming had faded long away, like whoever was screaming knew that an adult is awake. I was terrified as I returned to the living room and quickly turned on the television, as I left most of the lights on as well. I didn't go back to sleep until the sun came up. I couldn't believe what I heard and witnessed. I was treated like a crazy person whenever I told my story. It got so bad that I kept my experience to myself. To this day, I don't care what people think of my experience. I know what I heard. A couple of years later, it happened to me again, but that's a whole other story. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 177. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. I'm currently working on the next special one, the next Paranormal Tea. I'm hoping to do a Hatman video. It's slowly coming together. Another week, maybe 2 at the most. We'll see. I'm looking every week. It's getting there. It's coming together. I'm going to keep the outro short, though, because I decided to do a little extra recording, as I do sometimes. Instead of recording on Wednesday, which is when I'd usually do this, I'm recording on, technically Wednesday morning, but my brain is Tuesday. You know how that works. and I have made myself hungry, so I'm thinking soup and sandwiches. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.